Today we're going to be talking about kind of managing congregational change and expectation, because as you can imagine, on a church project or any project, there's a lot that goes into buy-in from the entire team, the entire community. My name is Brandon Nice. I have the blessing of being able to serve as the president of David Nice Builders. My parents started that company in 1975. I get to serve alongside my brother and a phenomenal team of people. We're locally owned and operated, and have been in James City County for just over 50 years. I'll let Phil introduce.
My name is Phil Murdock. I'm the lead minister at LifePointe Christian Church. We're located just up in Toano, Virginia. We were a church plant 20 years ago and we were a mobile church for over 15 years and just recently moved into our first fixed permanent campus.
Yeah, so we thought it'd be cool on this specific topic was to get a real life conversation between a builder and a pastor who just went through this process actually together. We were fortunate enough to be able to build the project for Phil and LifePointe. So we wanted to just kind of give some real life context and updates and information that may be helpful for you guys as you're going through your planning process. So I'll kick it off, Phil, and just say, what surprised you most about leading a project?
Well, a few things about this project you need to know. Again, we were mobile for 15 years. We had, like some of you have done, we searched for several years for a piece of land or a building to build on. And we actually acquired a 10-acre horse farm. It had large metal agricultural buildings, that one of which was like a horse riding arena, dirt floors. Nothing fancy, but that was what we purchased to retrofit into our first campus. And so a little bit of a different build, but it very much fits the culture of where we're at and sort of personality. If you ask me what surprised me the most about this project, that I would tell church leaders would be that it takes a lot of time. And I don't mean like just time out of your schedule. You sort of fall in love with the property or the building and think, okay, we're going to buy this and we'll be in it in 6 months or a year. And you realize, no, it's going to be probably multiple years before you actually ever have your first service in there, depending on what you purchase. There's a lot to be done. It is a marathon. It is not a sprint. If you were in this last workshop, just all the different feasibility processes, all the different studies that have to be done. So that was I would say a surprise. This was not my first commercial build, but it was once again like, oh yeah, this takes a long time, or it takes a while. The other part I would say, for those of you that are church leaders in here, I should have been surprised by this, but it was a drain it was exciting, yet it was exhausting for our staff. Because while we were building, we were still doing our week-to-week operations. We were still preparing for services every Sunday. We were still counseling with people. We were still doing funerals, things like that. Meanwhile, we've got a multi-million-dollar project that's taken place, and it required a lot. And so I would just encourage anybody who's going into that, don't be surprised like I was with that. Be prepared for it.
Yeah, thanks. The time is one that often seems to be forgotten in any process through building, and it does take a lot longer through what Al and Billy were talking about, through the planning component, everything leading up to construction. It can be several years, even after you identify the property. But Phil, in terms of surprises, like, was the resistance what you expected, and was the pushback initially, like, did it come from who you thought it would, or talk a little bit about that? What was harder, like, and what resistance did you receive, and was the finance part of it more challenging, or the emotional aspect of it?
Well, for those of us that have been in churches, or the churches that we're at for a long time, you can anticipate who the individuals will be who will give you sort of the pushback early on in the process. And we knew who those individuals would be for the most part, and we love them, but we knew who some of our critics would be. And so yeah, we had some of that. I wouldn't say resistance, but just a lot of questions. Why now? Why this place? Why that much money? Why? And again, most were well-intentioned, and we love them, but be ready for that. As far as which was harder, the emotions of it or the finances, I think they're tied together quite a bit. I would say the finances were harder, but sometimes the finances sort of propel the emotions of it, because as you start looking at the hard numbers of what's it's gonna take to make this dream a reality, it can make you emotional pretty quick. And so I know for me, even personally, as the pastor of the church, there was even this part of like second guessing, like, is this the right thing? Is this build really necessary? Are we gonna spend all this money? Am I gonna sit? I remember I went through like this dark 2-week period where I was like, I'm absolutely going to collapse the church, and this is going to be my legacy. My boys are going to know that Dad was the dad who just absolutely killed that church, as if it's on us to begin with. But so there's a lot of emotions, and the finances and the emotion, and the financial and the emotional piece sort of come together.
Yeah, so from that perspective of the finances and emotions, which are all extremely personal, right? But for some reason, churches or 501c3s or charities, why do they feel more personal? Because from our perspective, there is a lot more intimacy involved there. But why do you think they feel more personal from your perspective?
I would give 3 things. One, it's personally, because for those of us in ministry, this is our life's calling. This is, what we feel very much God has brought us to and prepared us for. And so there's a responsibility to be good stewards with what we have and to honor God in those decisions. And so personally, there was I don't want to say stress, but a thing there of just, hey, I need to make sure that I'm doing this for all the right reasons, not just to be like the church down the road or whatever, or because we just feel like it's something we need to do. I think for our people, it was deeply emotional because church buildings, there's a lot of things in life that take place there. It's where people get married. It's where celebrations of life take place. It's where they, if they have kids, their kids are learning about Jesus there, as well as hopefully at home, but their kids are kind of growing up there. So I think there's an emotional attachment to a church building that is very different than the local Starbucks or something like that, because it's where much of their life takes place. And I think there's also, it's personal because the reality of it is they're paying for it. They're the ones you're asking in a capital campaign to give. And so many of them are making really hard financial choices to make sure that the church can afford to do this. And so for them, there's a personal part of it because it's not just their emotions, they're financially invested in this as well. I would ask you, talking about like Starbucks and a church building, what do you think is, like, how do churches handle, you guys work with a lot of commercial businesses. Mm-hmm. What do you think is the biggest difference that is done differently between businesses, say, churches?
That's a great question. I think back to the emotional component of it has to be the primary answer. Because ultimately there's a lot of differing views within the church of how certain things should be handled. Right? They feel personal because for private business owner, that's one sole source owner that's predominantly investing all of their life's hard work and finances into a building, and it's a point-to-point business or what have you. But from a church standpoint, it's essentially the same thing with a much larger group of people. So the emotional attachment to the finances, to the investment of time, to the investment of giftings and talents, it all ties into it. But that's why it's really important for them to have a solidified leadership team, right? And it's not just that it's an emotional aspect. Anybody that has been involved in a church really want to be good stewards of the finances that they're entrusted with from a leadership perspective, right? So you have a committee or a board, or the church as a whole, there's a lot of opinions and views that come into play that they're just trying to be good stewards of what the Lord's entrusted them with, and from a financial standpoint, for the greater body and the whole good. But emotions usually kick really into high gear with churches when there has to be some tough decisions made, like cutting scope, or when you have to save costs by cutting scope, or even increasing budgets, because that ultimately results in somebody or some program or something being affected, right? So it's very challenging at times to kind of bring it back home of, hey, we're going to have to value engineer to cut cost to keep the project moving forward, but you've got to be very diligent in paying attention to every component so that somebody a part of that process doesn't feel left out. Where would you say, if there is any, and we don't see it often, but it absolutely does happen, but where would you say the division or separation of that would actually start, or just conflicts within the process?
Yeah, I mean, conflict and maybe division or disagreement can come from a lot of different directions, whether that's, sometimes you can have a group of people who don't necessarily like, and they'll sort of build their tribes and that sort of thing. I will say we were very fortunate in that we didn't deal with a whole lot of that. And I attribute that to our leadership team, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a little bit. We tried to be very proactive. We actually had a session with our leadership and our staff where we almost played a guessing game. What questions will be asked? And we created a long list of what do you think the questions will be that we will get? And we created that document. And what we tried to do was answer those questions before they were ever asked. We tried to be very proactive in that and just get out in front of those things and answer even the uncomfortable questions. We did not avoid uncomfortable conversations or questions. We made sure that our communication was consistent. We didn't want to inundate them in that we were every single day or even every week, but we tried to make sure that we were consistent, that they could anticipate when they would hear the next update. We posted pictures online, all the things that I'm sure many of you already do or would do. So that was sort of with the building, hey, here's the design, here's the layout, here's some pictures of how it's going, here's the timeline, here's why we're doing this thing and not this that maybe you feel is important. The other thing I would say that to where division really can get spun up quick is financially. And we just made a decision very early, and this was after consulting with some churches who had gone before us and built, was that we were going to be fully 100% transparent up front with the finances. There was nothing that was going to be shadowy. Even if it was bad news, even if it wasn't great news, we were going to absolutely be fully transparent with all things. So if the prices went up, we told them. We built during COVID, in the middle of COVID. In fact, it was scary because none of our people were coming in person, and we were building a multi-million-dollar building, and so that was tough. But we still were very financially transparent. One of the things I would share in regards to communication and transparency is this. Your honesty and transparency will not only build trust during your build, but it is an investment that will pay years of dividends down the road. If your people feel like you were fully honest and transparent with them during one of the biggest seasons of your church, financially, emotionally, and other ways, they will trust you a year or 2 or 5 years down the road when you want to do something else that's maybe not a building, but it's a new ministry or whatever, because they will say they were honest and talked to us like adults when we were going through this other campaign. So again, I would say we were proactive when division started. The other thing I would say is team structure was really important for us to avoid sort of the tribal mentality sometimes happens. We had a very small ultimate decision team, a team of 5 to 7 people. And we had one spokesman from that team who spoke to the contractor and one spokesman from that team who spoke to the congregation. And now that person would make it clear I'm speaking on behalf of this leadership team. But we tried to be very clear who the decision makers were and who the communication would come from. That way, if they heard it from somewhere else, it's well, you didn't hear it from that team. We had our staff involved, but we did not involve them on that final decision team because they had other things to do. And we had other teams that would pick the colors of paint and the colors of flooring and things like that. But they would share their decisions with that final leadership team, and then they would communicate it to the builders. I hope that makes sense. We didn't want the builders hearing from a bunch of different committees, and we didn't want our church family hearing from a bunch of different committees. We made very clear where that communication was going to come from. And that got particularly really important when we had to start value engineering. For us, if you remember during COVID, the supply chain issues, cost went up quickly, and so we had to make some cuts. If you come visit our property today, we don't have asphalt in our driveway. It's still gravel, and it drives people crazy, especially our staff. I leave every day with an ash of gray on my car. But that was cut during this process, along with some other things, another building we wanted to get done. We purchased our own flooring to just save a little bit of cost, and we purchased it and had the floor put it in. So we did what we could to, so once we started value engineering, we had to communicate why we were doing that to our people, why they weren't going to have asphalt, and they're going to just have to drive on gravel. And 4 years later, we still have gravel.
Gravel works. No, the value engineering component is really important. Back to the very first session of Brad talking about a master plan, right? They had a master plan that said, here's our vision, and how are we going to get there? And through the process of CMAR bringing in a contractor and an architect, everybody from the very beginning, they were able to identify quickly, along with our help, subs help, and the architect's help of, oh, wait a minute, our master plan is exceeding the current budget we want to spend now. What are we willing to let go of now and push down to future phases, and what are we not willing to get rid of right now? So it was a very detailed process that took, quite honestly, close to a year between the phasing and the planning, where the architect really helped tremendously as well to offer inputs on value engineering, not changing necessarily limiting them from an aesthetic standpoint or an operation standpoint. Sometimes it's simple things like material manufacturer. Pick a different manufacturer that gives you the same aspect or usability for what you're putting in that saves you money because it might be cheaper at that time. So the value engineering process is important, but one thing I wanted to follow up with is when you're selecting that team, on whether it's a smaller church community or a larger church community, how did you guys go through that process? Because I imagine there was a lot of people that were like, I'll help, I'll help, I'll help, and you guys did an excellent job of keeping it relatively small. Was it strictly just your elder team that you led with?
So the final team was our elder team, but again, others had input in, but we just felt like it was going to be our elder team. And I would just say this: within our elder team, we had some that were, this was their giftedness. Was this sort of project management. So we had some within our team that had, our elder team had very little to do with sort of the day-to-day decisions, and some that had high level. But ultimately, that team was the one that people in our church understood were the final decision makers on this. I mean, we did the congregational vote thing, don't get me wrong. We did the congregational vote for the, are we going to build this or not? Here's the design. But once, I think we did 2 of those. Once that was done, we weren't going back to the congregation with like, do you like this color carpet or this color carpet? Because sometimes those things can open the door for division even more. It's just better for that team just to own it and deal with the consequences of it. Let me ask you, what are some of the red flags that you see, like when it comes, I'm sure there's some stories you probably have working with churches, but what are some things for you that when you start to hear or see with churches, you're like, oh, that's going to lead to potentially a difficult place?
Yeah, this is completely off script, but it's pretty relevant and recent. We actually have a church that we've been working with who, against our better judgment and recommendation, is establishing their capital campaign budget goals without having a master plan or fully knowing what the building's going to look like or where they're going, and asking their congregation to donate towards a budget for a build. Seen it done before, doable, but it opens up a lot of avenues for challenges when they raise the money, which I'm confident they will. And if they come in way over budget or under budget or whatever, there's problems there. But for us, the one of the bigger red flags from our standpoint would be just not having a clear chain of command in the decision-making process, because that can slow it down significantly, add cost, add time, create division. Like when there's too many people involved, again, and have as many committees as you want, just have a very clear authority in a decision-making process of who's making the ultimate decision for what's happening for selections and the directions of things. The other component is financial misunderstanding, not having the transparency with the constituents or even your own team from the very early on process of cost realities as well as time realities. So the more you understand that from the very beginning, the more you talk about that, the more you speak to that, even when it's good, even when it's challenging, the better it is. Because that will, if you don't understand the timeline and there's too many people involved, the financial component up from early on, it'll lead to making rush decisions or having to make decisions down the road because of not understanding that will ultimately leave you with something that you initially wanted. With that being said, though, I think that having the leadership team aligned, to Phil's point, their team did an excellent job of being aligned, and even if they disagreed at times, absolutely is going to happen, but they were aligned when they came out of that room or those meetings on how they presented to the entire congregation so that they were always being able to answer from the same perspective to keep the process moving forward, which allowed for all types of decisions to be handled openly, and issues and delays to be handled extremely effective and quick as well. With that, from a red flag standpoint, how much did you, or how much do you think you should tell the congregation? You already mentioned that the finances were extremely transparent. They were, but I guess how transparent were you with everything else as well?
Well, I would say, it's funny, you tell that story. I had a friend who was, they were building a building, and I know the contractor got a knock on the door, and there were 3 people who were like, I know the pastor and the eldership have said this, but we're charter members here, and we want to talk to you about some things. And so you can probably, you can imagine that happening. So again, keeping that decision team tight and very clear is really important. As far as what information we shared, again, we were highly, highly transparent with finances. When it came to all the other stuff, we didn't try to bury them in details. We weren't like, hey, we're going with this brand of hinges for the door. They don't care about that. But on the big stuff, we tried to make sure that they were very much, we communicated our people that we would discuss anything privately. And we made sure that they knew that that door was open. So we would kind of share high-level stuff, like this is sort of big things that are happening, but we didn't want to kill people with details, but we'd also say, look, we want you to know our door is open to conversation on anything you have questions about. And we got some bizarre, weird questions from time to time, and that was okay, but we were open to any of that. One thing, I would think, one little, I don't know, a hack, if you will, that we've discovered accidentally was just, even on some of the things you communicate and how you communicate it, we just shared flippantly one time that we were having a meeting to discuss hardware for doors. And the number of people who came to us and said, that's crazy that you guys had to have a meeting about the hardware of the door. But they went on to say, like, that gave them comfort to know that if we were spending that much time discussing the hardware on the doors, then we were probably spending enough time on the other things that were more important. And so we didn't plan that, but it was just funny how many people were like, that's cool. That if you guys are spending that much time on something that simple, I'm sure you have the other details covered. So again, how much do we share with people? As much as is reasonably possible. If they wanted more details private, we would have those. But when it came to finances, again, I can't stress this enough. We did not want anyone to feel like we were moving things around and trying to be deceitful in any way. You're talking about what red flags. What would you say are healthy things that churches can do to be successful in this? What are some examples of some things you've seen where churches have done this really well, and that in turn helped the project go well?
Yeah, it's a lot of what we've talked about already, but I would say that first and foremost, they communicate often, effectively, and very clearly. But they're extremely organized, and they have very clear and measurable goals, so that there's metrics and data that they can reference back to those goals. So, for instance, this is our budget. So when they have finance updates, we're either over budget, we're under budget, we're having some challenges with the budget, but those goals are defined from the very early on process, so it's not a moving target when they're giving those updates, which opens the door for more gray areas, I should say. They don't have to be the most accurate in terms of like the nitty-gritty details down to the nth degree on the updates, but they do give enough for the high levels so that the congregation feels included, right? The leadership team, again, being aligned is critical in that, and it avoids parking lot conversations. To your story, you just said that can kill the process very, very quickly, where you're having a leadership team making decisions, and then if that leadership team leaves that meeting and the decisions and the builders, and there's parking lot conversations or backdoor conversations that contradict what was said in that room, happens all the time. And not that it can't be resolved, but it absolutely will slow the process down and start to unravel. The other thing is I think that healthy churches, from a leadership standpoint, do is that once they move forward with a decision, they maintain that momentum. They don't allow things to be rehashed unless it's something significant that says, oh, wait a minute, let's take a step back. But typically when the decision is made, they address the issues and make that decision head on, and they move forward with speed. So that helps tremendously. Visual progress updates are very good. I think another one that's been very successful is if you feel led to, have your architect or your builder come in once or twice and actually do an update with you, so they can be there from a technical standpoint to help answer questions. We've done that several times with other churches where we'll show up on a Sunday morning and say, we're here just to help answer questions about the process. We've also seen, if it's an existing church facility, and we've done this with a lot of buildings, but and I know Henderson has as well, what is very helpful is engaging them in the process, doing like a hard hat tour, allowing them to walk through the project. It's stipulated times, not open-ended, right? But like going through and just letting them be a part of the process as it's coming to life is very, very helpful. Makes them feel like they have buy-in and community overall. So there's a lot of emotion leading up to this whole component. Like, how did you guys handle the emotional dip? Because with every project, with every big decision, there's always an emotional dip. There's highs, there's lows. How did you guys handle that? Like, when did you feel resistance peak, and how did you handle criticism, if there was any? So talk a little bit about that.
Well, resistance-wise, again, it wasn't so much resistance, but I would just say maybe stress. Again, we built during COVID. Most of you, if you're going to build, probably are going to build during a global pandemic, but there are times where there are, and things happening in the world that you can't control that are going to impact your build. Whether that's gas prices and diesel skyrocketed, or you simply cannot get a certain item because there's a supply chain issue. And so that certainly can create some things that are just beyond your control. And my advice on that would be just understand it's beyond your control. We were very fortunate. We really enjoyed working with David Nice Builders because they were very helpful. When we came into those times where it just was a little bit harder than it had been, and things were happening, they were really great. So I'd say who you choose as your builder is really important to kind of help you through those harder moments. And then for us, whenever we kind of felt, you can kind of feel it. For those of you that are leadership at churches, you can kind of feel when the momentum is there, and you can kind of feel when the momentum is starting to draw back a little bit. We could sense that, and that was when we would use, now's a great time for an update, a more in-depth update to get our people reinvigorated, excited about this. That's sort of how we managed through that.
Yeah, I think what we've seen of churches that help manage that effectively is that they normalize it, right? It's a building. It's a construction process. You speak to it, letting everybody know that there are absolutely going to be times of challenge, market challenges, or just where you might feel stuck in the process and then it's harder than you thought it would be. But normalizing that conversation to your parties and to the congregation and your team, it just helps them understand and breathe of like, okay, failure is and even just failure forward or just setbacks forward are a completely normal part of the process. It's how that collaborative team from the architect, the builder, and you guys work together to work through it, which is what makes it understanding that it's okay, right? The time up front, I can't stress this enough, the time up front where it feels like forever in the pre-construction standpoint and the planning, that will pay dividends beyond any reasonable measure that you can imagine versus rushing through that just because you feel like you want to get a building out of the ground. I don't know from your perspective, but from our perspective, that upfront process can feel very, very slow, but it is extremely important. And then I'll always say that what we see in churches and in just any good leader is continually recast your vision and your mission. Like, speak to that all the time. Realign your team, realign anybody that's involved in the process. Always start with that, never lose focus of it. That should be the guiding light in every decision that is absolutely made. Like, you guys did an excellent job at every meeting of, okay, here's our vision, right? It may not be tomorrow that we get there, but how are we going to maintain focus to take baby steps to bite out to make sure that we achieve that ultimate vision, which helps recalibrate. And it keeps you from losing forward momentum. What would you do differently? Like, if you could go back from day one, what would you change?
We'd have asphalt. I'm just kidding. I will say this. One of the things I think we did at the end that I'm now almost on a monthly timeline of discovering, when we got towards the end of our project, you'll find there's all these little things that you didn't think about or things that pop up. And we really started to, so we started trying to do it the cheapest way we could because we felt like we were running out of money. And we felt so much that we wanted to hold to that dollar amount that we gave our people. That, I mean, it was, and what I'm telling you is like, these weren't like savings of tens of thousands of dollars. It was the savings of hundreds. You know, do we put a better grade flooring in our office, or do we put the cheapest thing we can find just so we can have something in there and we can honor the number we gave? We're paying for that 4 years in. We bought the cheapest stuff. And now some of that cheapest stuff we bought at the end, I think our people would have understood if we just were slightly over. And again, I'm not talking about tens of thousands. I'm talking about a few $1,000s and bought better stuff. So we got tight at the end and just didn't want to spend any more money because for us, that number became so important. The other thing I would say is this, that I would do differently, is I would take better care of our staff. I underestimated all of our staff that was with us during the build or with us today. So nobody left. We did not break them, but we bent them pretty hard. And some of them still show the evidence of it. It is a lot. I would just stress to you, take care of your ministry staff. Take care of your leaders. When the arrows come in from people, huddle together, have each other's back. You have got to be united on this. People see a gap or crack that they can sort of take advantage of, they will. That's because they're human, not because they're bad. And so, yeah, I would just say some things I wish I'd have done better is I wish I'd have been more aware and taken better care of our staff during this process. Give them extra vacation time. Give them a meal. Just do something to just say, hey, I know you're handling the week-to-week stuff on Sundays, and in addition doing this, take good care of them. Let me ask you, oh, did I hit mute?
Yeah, pretend it off, maybe.
Sorry, there we go. Let me ask you, what would you say to pastors? You and I had a lot of conversations before we built. What would you say to those that are in church leadership positions before announcing any plans to build to their congregations?
Before I answer the question, one of them would be like, be careful who you offer to paint the project. I'm not saying that is like the one thing for some reason.
The teenagers.
Yeah, when we're meeting with churches or clients, we're like, hey, we've got a couple of kids that are going to be willing to help paint. We're like, okay, what wall? They're like, no, the whole building. We're like, all right, let's have a conversation. That's kind of jokingly fun. Like, we absolutely understand from a builder's perspective, there's a lot of people that attend your church that may be in the industry from a professional standpoint. We welcome that. If there's professional tradesmen and women, electricians, mechanics, a lot of times you guys have existing relationships with those firms that are wanting to contribute towards the church. The most important thing is involving them in that process, but setting very clear expectations that they're licensed, they're assured, they can provide the adequate manpower. Again, I tell a lot of churches, like, we're completely fine to let your team paint as long as there's a two-way understanding of schedule, cost, quality, that we all work together to collaborate on. So that's just something that I always tell pastors and church leadership, like, hey, you're going to get a lot of people that want to offer to help in this project. There's certain ways to do it, and there's good ways and there's very challenging ways. That would be one. The other one would be absolutely to align your leadership team first. I know I cannot say that enough, but it gives, but have fun, right? Have fun. It's meant to be, it's an exciting process. It is very challenging at times, but have fun, recast the vision, recast the mission, keep that at the forefront of everything you do for what the Lord's put on your heart and for the body of Christ, for your church. But align your leadership team, because when something comes up and something changes or an unforeseen condition or question from your congregation, it's easy for you guys to answer because it's construction. There is no perfect building, period. You can build 100 of the same building 100 times, and I promise you want to change something. So align leadership, clarify the authority structure, and probably I tell everybody to prepare for a little bit longer timeline than you expect. We had a couple of rapid fire questions. I think I'll leave it with just a few, Phil, like if you could just briefly, and then we'll allow some questions of like most stressful, most rewarding, and your biggest leadership lesson.
Most stressful for me was capital campaign. I don't know how many of you have ever done a capital. I know that sounds weird. It's like not part of the building process, but it is. Just how much energy that takes in the beginning. Most rewarding would have been our capital campaign total, because we went beyond what we expected in our first Sunday in our building. And the biggest lesson I learned was that your leadership builds trust, not just for this build, but into the future. How about you? What biggest mistakes church makes, biggest misunderstandings, and what pastors should know about builders?
Probably the biggest mistake is trying to rush the process overall, which I've already alluded to a little bit. Just don't try to set a budget and press forward without having a team from the very beginning, of an architect, a builder you respect, and your team aligned, right? That's probably the biggest mistake that I see, where they try to don't base everything on historical data, get real-time input, real-time data up front, and establish a plan before you cast out. What do pastors need to know about builders? We basically run on three things, right? Clear plans, quick decisions, and coffee. Everything else is relatively straightforward from there. And we do love committees, as long as there's just one of them as making a decision at each individual time. So, yeah, Phil, thanks for the time, and thank you guys. We wanted to, if there's any questions for either one of us. Yes, sir.
I have a question for each of you. Phil, what kind of communication vehicles or methods did you use, particularly since you were during COVID? And Brandon, you mentioned that don't do the capital campaign until you have a pretty good feel on the budget. That said, how do you pay for the design and development portion of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So communication-wise, we have a rule, we call it 5 times 5 different ways. We didn't come up with that. So our thing was there was no one kind of communication. We would do social media, email, text, from stage, any way that we could get it out there, we would put that out there. So we actually created a communication plan before we started this, of just like weekly, we give out this information, monthly, we give out this information. And then again, that went out on multiple different platforms, because not everybody uses social media, not everybody uses email, not everybody's there on a Sunday morning. So for our thing was anything that was sort of bigger news, we wanted to make sure it was shared 5 times in 5 different ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah, to answer the question of how do you pay for the upfront conceptual budget and stuff that you'll need without a capital campaign, I've seen it done a couple of different ways. One is I've actually seen churches do a small capital campaign just for that portion that says, hey, how far should we go? And that's relative to how deep into the process you want to get to, like what Al and Billy were talking about, in terms of, do we do a full master plan, or do we just spend enough to be able to be dangerous to know we have the site, we can build on this site, what our setbacks requirements are, how much square footage we can get, and then start to paint the picture with the architectural team of what elevations and things might look like to get detailed. I've seen them do small capital campaigns once they determine what that cost is going to be. And I've also seen where churches just had an earmarked fund that says, hey, we've got $10,000, $15,000. What will that get us in terms of starting the roadmap so that we can start to have a pretty high level picture of the overall capital campaign cost?
And to that real quick, I'll just say, if you do the capital campaign and you can show the pictures of what it's going to look like that, so you've gone through some of that process, it'll do so much better than we kind of have a dream we can't show you, but here is the dream. Here's what it looks like from a standpoint of drawings. Questions?
Yes, ma'am.
My question is for you, David. Brandon.
It's okay. It's fine.
How common is it, have you seen for organizations to hire a specific staff person just for the building project?
It's not, from our perspective and what I've seen, it's not very common for churches. I've absolutely seen it. You're talking about where they hire an outside third-party construction consultant. Typically, we've been blessed, and a lot of the churches that we've worked with, they've had somebody on staff or somebody that has attended the church that has a huge tie into the industry. We're doing one right now that one of the project managers on the team works for a general contractor full-time as a project manager, so that they are able to be on that process in the building committee. We do see it a lot in the public for sure, as well as the federal sector, where they bring in a construction manager. I think it's relative to what your comfort level is with your building committee, and if you guys feel like you can handle that. They are very valuable for the right reasons, depending on how your organizational structure is set up. I don't know if that helps or not, but I don't see it very common in churches, to be honest with you.
And there's some in the room, so you gotta be.
Yeah, no, it is. There are some in the room. But like I said, we see it a lot on public, see it a lot on federal from my perspective. Anything else? Well, thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.